Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. EMSI are actually hosting this webinar on behalf of two other organisations, PeoplePlus and Palladium. We thought it would be a great opportunity to hold a joint webinar, really looking at levelling up what's the current state of affairs in regards to skills and employment. And what we're really interested in sharing is some of the innovative approaches in regards to how skills and employment can be approached to really challenge some of the systemic inequalities that are out there. So we've got three presenters today, but just a few bits of housekeeping. You can ask questions over in the right-hand side control panel. So do ask any questions as and when you have any. All of the slides and a recording of today's webinar will be shared with everyone that has registered, and feel free to share that with your colleagues as required. So I just wanted to introduce our three speakers. I should probably introduce myself first. I'm Will Cookson. I'm the Director of Economic Development at EMSI UK. We also have Kenny Boyle, the MD of Employability at PeoplePlus, and we also have Chris Blackwell, an associate from Palladium. And all three of us will be sharing our thoughts on these issues around skills and employment and inequalities and how they can be approached. So I wanted to kick off really by, as you'd imagine, setting the context in regards to labour market trends. I also should give a brief introduction to EMSI for those of you who don't know us. EMSI are labour market specialists. Our mission is to use labour market data to help organisations and individuals make better informed decisions about employment and the world of work. And we see skills, which you see right in the middle of that diagram, as being absolutely key to understanding it and how those three different groups or stakeholders actually interact in the real world. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to look at headline trends about the current labour market. In my section, we're going to look at where things seem to be going through, trying to unpick and understand emerging demand. And then we'll look at how recovery seems to be, or early signs of recovery seems to be tracking by occupation. So first and foremost, in terms of understanding where we are currently, furloughing is really useful, partly because we can now, obviously with the fact that this has carried on for as long as it has, and we're on our third iteration of lockdowns, we can compare furlough take-up over time. And we can look to see how it's been distributed across different industries. And it's interesting just to look at where we peaked with furlough, which was in May 31st last year, with about 8.9 million. And that's fell by about 73% from the peak in October 31st. And that was obviously a result of restrictions being eased up from first lockdown. And that resulted in a reduction of furloughed employments by 6.5 million. Now, there's a lot of reasons and things that sit behind that. Unemployment has increased by circa 350,000, and furlough has increased over, in January it was up, but January it obviously increased as further lockdowns came in, but it didn't get back to those July and August levels. So what we've seen, and what's interesting, is if we look at how that's been distributed by industry, we can see some things that we'll be familiar of and some things that are quite different as we look at it in regards to where we are at the end of January. And those on the left-hand side, what we're looking at is distribution of furloughed employments by industry. And you'll see over on the left-hand side, you'll see accommodation and food services. And next up, you'll see wholesale and retail. And those dark lines that you see are the peak that I described in May of last year. And accommodation and food services is higher than it was at peak. And obviously that's not really surprising when you consider that essentially those industries are still shut down. What's interesting though is you can see if you go across to the right a bit, you look at manufacturing and construction are substantially lower than where they were at peak. And that's a good sign, and we'll see that come through when we look at job postings data as well. On the right-hand side, what you can see is the percentage change in furlough employments. So how has it changed? And again, that tells the same story. You can see there that construction and you can see that manufacturing are both, down by 80 to 70% compared to where they were in May of last year. So you can see a big change from first lockdown to the third lockdown, which is what we want to see. It is worth mentioning as well, as a point of reference, that we're still seeing many of those sectors that have had a really tough time of it continuing to have a tough time of it. So in terms of emerging demand for workers, what we're really seeing here, and this is looking at in February in terms of job postings data, what we saw is we identified that there were nearly 670,000 newly advertised job postings. Now that's down 6% on the volume of jobs that we would have had in November, but then that's probably not surprising when you consider that we're still in a lockdown scenario. But there is some interesting growth in demand at an occupational level. What we're tending to see here, and you'll see them right the way across, there's an interesting mixture. You've got media professionals, you've got a lot of professional roles where people are able to work remotely, and they've carried on to be able to recruit. Where we've seen that as well, where people are able to work remotely or outdoors in terms of agriculture, you see over there on the left-hand side, animal care, conservation, all of those are starting to pick up, which is great. But over on the far right-hand side, we see some sort of admin occupations, business research, and those may well be roles where there hasn't been the same amount of growth, but there'll be roles which are dependent on offices being opened up, which hopefully, and we're starting to see this, and over time we'd hope that those will start to bounce back. But that's a good idea of where we are at the moment. Also worth mentioning here, this is looking at occupations at a two-digit level, so quite a granular level. And what we're doing here is we're comparing last lockdown with the first lockdown. So on the x-axis that we've got here, you can see that we have, on the x-axis going across, we're looking at changes in job postings compared to lockdown 1 compared to the year before. And you can see here that dark light line that's going down the middle shows that that came in at around 46%. So all job postings dropped by about 46%. And on the y-axis, we're looking at changes in job postings in lockdowns 2 and 3, which comes in at about 26%, so, or slightly less, so 16%. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a drop, but no way near in 2 and 3, lockdown 2 and 3, in the same way that we saw in lockdown 1. What is interesting if we look at this by occupation, and we've color coded these, so green occupations are high skilled, we've got navy blue, which is labor intensive, purple, which is middle skills, and light blue is service orientated. And what we've seen over in the top right quarter there of the screen, what we've got is we've got the strongest occupations throughout, and lots of those include key worker roles or services that have been really required. So we've got protective service occupations, we've got health professionals, we've got caring professionals, we've got skilled agriculture, and then over just drawing back a bit, you've got teaching and education, you've got science and research roles, so roles that have had to carry on and there's been increased demand for. Then on the left-hand side, you've got two sections. If we look at the top section there, we've got the ones that are starting to bounce back. And by bounce back, we're saying that within lockdown 2 and 3, there's been an increased demand for these. They've not been strong throughout, but you can see there skilled construction and building trades, elementary trades and occupations, process plants and machine operatives, which will be connected to manufacturing. skilled metal, electrical and electronic trades. And all of those are showing really good signs of recovery, getting up to the 20%, 40%, which means that the job postings are coming through thick and fast. The ones that have been struggling throughout are in the bottom left quartile of the screen, or the graph, I should say. And there we see administrative occupations, sales occupations, secretarial. And again, that goes back to my point about the fact that offices aren't really open. And I think that's just really meant that people have not felt comfortable recruiting to those roles yet. What is interesting, though, is we can see the way in which things may track, and we can see where the way in which things are starting to bounce back when you look at construction and manufacturing. As soon as you can start to trade, then obviously job postings return. So what is this telling us? In summary, high-skilled roles still need to be filled and have largely held up throughout. But the greatest disruption has been in service-orientated roles, except for health and social care. And obviously, we've seen some disruption as well in regards to middle-skill roles as well. Some occupation areas are bouncing back, while others remain depressed. And as you'd imagine, we could relook at this in a month or two as hospitality and retail starts to open up, as we'll see in April, and it may look very different, but that's where we are at the moment. Obviously, this leaves us with the question, and pertinent to what we're discussing today, of what can be done to help people and employers quickly take advantage of the bounce back economy, and also when it does start to bounce back in those other sectors, who's going to be there to support them with recruitment activity. So this feels like a good time to hand over to Kenny at PeoplePlus.
Thanks, Will. Yes, indeed, it is that point in proceedings where Will is transformed from being one of the most knowledgeable individuals in the land on the matter of employability data to becoming my glamorous assistant. So I don't know, Will, if that requires some kind of wardrobe change. I suppose if it does, we can be thankful that all of this is taking place off camera. But I'll certainly try and keep. I'll try and keep the irritating next slide, please, Will, to a minimum. But you know, there's inevitably a component of that. So next slide, please, Will, if you don't mind. So for those of you who don't know us, here's a smorgasbord of facts entitled PeoplePlus on a page. In truth, it's actually all I could fit about PeoplePlus on this page. So I haven't been able to say, for instance, that we are the largest provider of access to work, or the largest independent provider of prison education, or to talk about the work that we do with disabled customers and carers. So that the takeout, however, that I'd invite you to come away with is twofold. So to the top right-hand side of your screens there, that we're a mission-led organisation and well on course to achieving our objective of making a direct difference to 1 million lives by the end of 2022. And secondly, that we have, if not a unique perspective on the challenges of the labour market, then certainly a highly bespoke one, an unusual one, in as much as we are at the same time one of the UK's largest providers of skills training support, as you see somewhere towards the middle of the slide there, in terms of the market share that we enjoy in relation to skills support for the unemployed, or the work that we do under AEB funding. But we're also one of the largest employability providers in the UK, as you're probably aware. The scale of the work that we did on the work programme referenced in the top left-hand corner of your screen there, as well as the work that we do in Wales and Scotland with respectively Fair Start Scotland and ESP and traineeships in Wales, and indeed we are the largest provider of enterprise support in the UK. So we put over, it's a remarkable figure really, over 100,000 people into self-employment in our time, and 50,000 over the past 5 years or so. So we're highly embedded in the delivery of these services across Scotland, Wales, and as it happens, Northern Ireland and Ireland, but that's outside the purview of this presentation, and almost every region of England. And it's this multi-stakeholder perspective regarding the regional employability and skills sector that I'm going to come back to later in the presentation. But for now, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, Will, let me build on some of the data that we've already seen from Will and note a couple of further insights which develop one of our themes today, the unequal challenges faced by many in today's grim-looking labour market. Now, I say grim, but first let's acknowledge that as we sit here today, almost exactly a year on from the start of the pandemic and with an end to lockdown tantalizingly close for us all, particularly on such a lovely sunny day as today, that things could have been a great deal worse. And indeed, the forecast predicted it to be so. We see here the OBR's revised unemployment forecast in the dark blue line of 6.5% from March of this year, but almost halving their predictions of last summer, which were topping out at around 12%. And to get a flavour of how bad it might have been, I find the sobering set of statistics, which I'm going to ask Will to move on to on the next slide, provide a pause for reflection. So we've seen gross domestic output falling by 9.9% in 2020, the largest fall on record. Conversely, payroll employment fell 800,000, certainly the largest fall since the early 90s, but just a 2.7, and I'm doing the universal sign for quotation marks as I speak to you here, but just a 2.7% fall in that statistic. If employment had followed GDP, that would have been a drop of 2.9 million. So it could indeed have been a great deal worse. But against this more optimistic perspective, if I can move you on to the next slide, Will, this is a crisis which is looking all too familiar to many of us, I'm sure, in that the lowest paid, as you'll see from the right-hand side of this chart from the latest labour force survey, shows it is they who are bearing the brunt of the unemployment increase most forcefully. Indeed, the rates of employment of those sectors of the population which have traditionally struggled most in tough employment conditions have all worsened over the last 2 quarters. So young people are now experiencing employment rates which are 8 percentage points lower than the average. For ethnic groups, it's 10 percentage points. For disabled people, it's 30 percentage points. And all of these gaps, after frankly years of albeit marginal narrowing, have gone into reverse. So if you move to the next slide, Will, there's no question that the most acutely challenging employment picture we've had for decades lies ahead of us. And I think there's no doubt that those challenges are going to be unequally borne by the lowest paid. So turning to our key stakeholders, as we did, to determine how they might help, in the words of today's session, to rethink regional skills and employment approaches, and to better understand their concerns about the prospects of helping those furthest from the labour market, we approached around 650 of our partner organisations with a range of questions about the challenges that they face and the assistance that they need when supporting employment in their particular regions, and found a familiar refrain, entirely consistent, in fact, with what we've understood from stakeholders in a regional context over many years, although it was instructive to begin to quantify this. So overwhelmingly, organisations, large and small, recognise the value of and the need for more coordinated, joined-up approaches to local, regional and national employability and skills policy implementation. But long-standing structural problems get in the way, and these may be familiar to you. So national employers, for instance, struggle to cope with what they see as the complexity of the funding landscape, particularly at a regional level. Regional policymakers have the challenge of supporting their local employers, but also trying to gain traction with national ones on a regional level individually. And then we have a clear willingness to, for providers within that community, whether it's employability or skills, to work in the word that we've come to recognise in recent months in a spirit of co-opetition, but finding that difficult because the work that they do is inherently regionalised from the funding sources which they're able to access. And these, bluntly, are not the characteristics which are conducive to a speedy recovery. And so we need ways in which to address those, which I'm going to tackle on the next slide, Will, if you'd be so kind. And our perspective is a disarmingly simple one, frankly. That for decades we've all of us sought to tackle the challenge of long-term unemployment, but have done so typically from a supply side first perspective, so the left-hand side of the line that you're looking at there. And I guess our view is that that may just be the wrong place to start. If one goes back to the Leach review, for instance, it calls out very powerfully and graphically that a supply side first view of improvements in the labour market is adopted, then you will end up with illogicalities like, and I think the example he gave was 120,000 hairdressers being trained in a particular year for only 12,000 hairdressing jobs. It has to either start with or be properly balanced with an understanding of the labour market demand. So that's where PeoplePlus starts. And I guess it's probably in part due to the fact that one of our sister organisations, Staffline Recruitment, is the largest recruiter in the UK, putting some 50,000 people into work on a daily basis. So we have a natural comfort and familiarity with that demand side of the labour market continuum. And if I can ask you to build the slide, if you mind, Will. So what we hope to be able to do is working with Staffline and our very extensive portfolio of employability partners, both theirs and ours, employment partners, I beg your pardon. We hope to be able to lend the scale and performance leadership, service innovation, and intelligence wrapped around the use of that employment data through a set of shared services, which we really hope, and remember our mission-based objective here, we really hope will make the maximum impact on the lives and the employer businesses with whom we come into contact, all leading to improved regional and national growth on a more equitable economic footing. If you move to the next slide, if you mind, Will, this is what has given rise to a service that we call our social recruitment framework. What is the social recruitment framework? I hear you all cry. Well, at this point in proceedings, I had hoped to share an extraordinarily sexy video with you, but alas, webinar technology is not quite able to show such inflammatory material, so you'll have to put up with my rather more prosaic description, but at least hopefully will aid simplicity. And the model works as follows. Starts with that labour market demand side view, as I described, working with our partners, Staffline included, but around 50 of the UK's largest employers to understand what their recruitment requirements are in the mid to near term. So a sort of 6-month view brought into very sharp detail within a 1-month window. We then share that intelligence, excuse me, across a network of training providers. So we break the impasse, which is bedeviled providers for many a long year when working with national employers, where we say, how can we help you, Mr. National Employer? They say, we'd like support here in London, there in Birmingham, over here in the Northwest, and the provider has to say, well, I can help you in one of those, but not in the others. So we've taken co-opetition very much to the heart of this model, and are working with a network of around 40 of the best skills and employability providers in the UK to make sure that they can provide those regional specific requirements in line with the employer's prospectus. The training provider then delivers that sector-based specific training based on the intelligence we provide us. So the absolute requirements the employers need to ensure that a candidate can move into employment with that employer from day one. The candidates complete their course, they do their interviews, and it's a guaranteed interview that they're offered in this service, and they progress into jobs. And some 78% of the candidates with whom we work move into employment. If I move you on, Will. And the benefits, and if you can put the build up as well, while we're here, the benefits for job seekers are clear. They understand that they're undertaking training with the real prospect of moving into employment, and don't forget the importance of that motivating component versus training for training's sake. The employers have access to pre-trained day one ready candidates. Providers have the confidence that they're providing the right support for their learners with a guaranteed interview. and the funding bodies who support the training providers with those activities are assured that the funding that they're applying are being optimized and directed where it's required most, with candidates having the opportunity to move into work. So it's a win. I've said win-win situation here, but I guess it would be win to the power of 6 for candidates, employers, providers, commissioners, ultimately the taxpayers who fund this, and for the local, regional, and national economy. And we know that this model works incredibly effective quickly and at scale. At the start of lockdown 1, we undertook a campaign with major supermarket groups like M&S, Ocado, Morrison's, Tesco, to move those negatively affected by COVID into new employment opportunities. We were able to match individuals without training straight into vacancies. We were able to provide short-term training or long-term training, depending on those requirements of the individual applicants. And in total, over 3 months, we moved some 25,000 people into new employment with a raft of other ancillary measures around the effectiveness of the campaign, which I won't brigade for you here, but an incredibly effective mechanism of addressing some of the asymmetries I think that Will was talking about in his presentation, where we see certain employers and certain sectors growing as others move into a period of stasis, and allowing us to take the underlying skill sets of the candidates with whom we work and move them as quickly as possible into new opportunities. And if I move you to the last slide, Will, please, last time you hear that refrain. I just wanted to flag that our employer partners, as you would expect, are already agnostic about race, age, formal educational training, and indeed, in many instances, the records of former offending. But we want to go further through an initiative that we'll be describing more in the coming weeks and months, which is an alignment of leading UK employers, chaired by former Skills Minister Anne Milton. It's called the Social Recruitment Advocacy Group, where we're working with employers to further tap into what we recognise as a real appetite on their part to recruit specifically to help those who are most disadvantaged in society, and in so doing directly help to address some of the inequalities that we've noted are likely to manifest themselves in this crisis as we go forward. In this, we're going to be specifically addressing one of the 3 Ps of the so-called triple bottom line, and hope perhaps that we can do for people, for the social impact that businesses can have, what has been done so successfully for planet, the third P, considering the environmental benefit that businesses can have. And that's one of the reasons, but only one of many, that makes us so pleased to be working closely with Palladium, who have a fantastic international track record in driving large-scale social and environmental impact projects. And with that, I'm going to cease my part of the webinar and hand over to Chris Blackwell on behalf of Palladium.
Thank you, Kenny. Just had to come off mute there. And so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Kenny. And Will, hopefully if you could move on the slide. So just wanted to give a brief introduction to Palladium, and firstly to say that Palladium are really excited to be working in partnership with PeoplePlus, and I think the focus of PeoplePlus on people, profit, and planet really strongly aligns with Palladium's. And Palladium are one of those organisations that are actually quite big, but very few people have heard of. So just a little bit about them. So Palladium works in over 90 countries and works predominantly with government at a national and local level, with local communities, with civil society, institutions, works with business, and also works with impact investors. And if you look on their website, they'll talk about coming up with solutions to some of the world's most difficult and challenging problems. And so typically they're working, they do a lot of work in really where economic development meets environmental issues, where economic development meets jobs and skills issues, where economic development meets health issues. So very interesting organisation. I'm very pleased to be working in partnership with PeoplePlus. Now, if we could move on, Will, to the next slide. I think criticism has been levelled at historic employability programs that they haven't sufficiently worked with local stakeholders to integrate with local provision or to focus on achieving local priorities. And I think Kenny talked about some of the challenges historically of why that has been difficult. And I think just to sort of say, yeah, I think as we look forward at Restart, yeah, I think it's going to be incredibly important for organisations like PeoplePlus and Palladium to really kind of get this right this time round. And Palladium have an approach, so in the 91 countries in which they work, they always work at a local level. And you know, it's how do you do that? They talk about an ecosystem approach, which really is about understanding, engaging with the key people locally, understanding the drivers, basing what they do on researching what are some of the root causes of the systemic barriers, and in this instance to employment and helping people back into employment, and only then letting that shape the coordinated service of how they do things, and then having a cycle of evaluating, did that work, did that not work, learning, redesigning, moving forward. So that's something that Palladium would want to bring to the local delivery of services in this space. If we focus in specifically on the West Midlands, so if we could just move on, Will, to the next slide. Restart isn't just about employment, and I think getting this right, there's obviously got to be a focus on jobs and promoting local skills and employment, but also a focus on growth, supporting the growth of local businesses, a focus on the environment, on the social that Kenny talked about, and also on innovation. If we look at, Will shared some excellent insight into the labour market. If you look at the impact of coronavirus, Brexit, carbon net zero, and technological change, those four things together are driving rapid changes in the labour market, and they're driving rapid changes in where jobs are going to be in the future. And as Kenny talked about, maybe historically employment programs are focused on that supply side and support to job seekers. And I think, if we were to take that approach with Restart, where things are happening, change is happening much more quickly, then we would miss out on opportunities for local job seekers and local employers. And so I think in this, the focus needs to be much broader. And I just wanted to do a bit of a dive down. If you could move on to the next slide, Will, thank you. Firstly, actually just a few details here of the types of skills and employment programs that Palladium has worked on kind of internationally. And very varied, very different, but I guess in each one there have been local solutions to the local challenges that's been underpinned by that international expertise. So actually in each instance that there is a local solution. But if we move on to the next slide, well, I just wanted to do a bit of a deep dive down into one of the areas in the West Midlands and to focus on Coventry. Interesting. So looking at the automobile sector, which is well established in the West Midlands, Coventry has an ambition to become a hub for electric vehicles. And in fact, Coventry has been recognised as a global leader on climate action. It's achieved a place on the Carbon Disclosure Programme. It's one of only 4 local authorities in the UK to be on the Global Cities A list. And potentially this means that there could be great opportunities in the local economy with local jobs, but also there's a risk that those opportunities are not taken advantage of, or that people who maybe get left behind on programs. And so I wanted to maybe Palladium bring a slightly different perspective here. And when we look at Coventry and we look at how the economy is changing them and what that might mean for the jobs market, Palladium will bring experience of working globally in different areas and in different economies where they've been going through such change. So an example is in Ghana. They've been doing a lot of work right across the ecosystem with employers, with local government, skills and employment programs, and looking at how do you ensure that the opportunities that are created by these change in industry and the economy, how they actually can, I guess, result in jobs and jobs growth for those who are most disadvantaged. So I just wanted to flag this as the type of thing that Palladium will bring a slightly different perspective. And as we look at working in the West Midlands, this is the type of area, but we're really focused on how might we ensure that there are not only jobs for people on programs like Restart to go back into, but actually jobs that support not only economic priorities, but environmental priorities as well. So I think that's probably as much as I wanted to say in terms of brief introduction to Palladium. And I think now, Will, I'm handing back to you for questions.
Thank you, Chris. Just want to say it's fascinating. I've been in and around the employment and skills world for more than a few decades now, and it's really interesting to see how you're approaching it and thinking about it. We haven't got lots of questions. One that has come through, and I think either of you may be well placed to deal with this, having recently gone through the tendering process. One of the questions is asking where we're at with the major tendering exercise currently underway to provide help to unemployed people. Have decisions been made? I could answer this, but I think, Kenny, you're probably best placed to give an update on where things are at currently.
Sure. I guess this may be a reference to the Restart programme, which is one of the mainstays of the Chancellor's plan for jobs, which is, I think, the most significant piece of public sector procurement, which has been undertaken in recent weeks and months. I think all I can say on that is that the timeline for the announcements in respect of those bids takes us to the 13th of April. So I think we will all know more about what the composition of that Restart delivery program will look like from a regional perspective, and the many providers involved from that point onwards. And then those contracts go live at the end of June.
Thank you. I think that's exactly what was being asked. Just a quick question. Obviously, we could have a wide number of different types of organisation skills providers on this webinar. If people want to find out more, Kenny, about the overarching programme that you described around social recruitment, what's their best route in?
Be delighted to speak to training providers or indeed employability providers, and to potentially have them join the rapidly growing network that I was describing. So I think that slightly old school perhaps, Will, but none the worse for it. I'd be very happy if they could email me at kenny.boyle@peopleplus.co.uk, and I'm sure my contact details will be provided as part of the administrative wrap-up for this session.
Yeah. We'll make sure contact details are there for yourself and for Chris as well. So I think that brings us to an end. As I mentioned at the start, all of the slides and the recording will be shared with everyone that's been with us today. Thank you for joining us, and thanks again to Kenny and Chris for sharing your thoughts about this important issue. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Cheers.